Hey everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Today, we're diving into a story that proves one single event can shake the foundations of an empire and change the course of world history forever. It's a tale involving colonists, a powerful king, and a whole lot of tea. This is the story of how a single tea party in Boston ignited a revolution and created the United States of America. So, how did we get here? How did a simple beverage become the symbol of a fight for freedom? To understand that, we need to rewind the clock to the mid-1700s. The American colonies were part of the vast British Empire, a global superpower. But this relationship was becoming seriously strained. After the costly 7 Years' War, known in America as the French and Indian War, Britain was drowning in debt. And who did they look to help pay it off? You guessed it, the American colonists. Parliament started rolling out a series of taxes that the colonists found deeply unfair. First came the Stamp Act in 1765, which taxed everything from legal documents to playing cards. Imagine having to pay a tax just to buy a newspaper. The colonists were furious. They boycotted British goods and protested so fiercely that Parliament eventually repealed it. But this was just the beginning. The British government still needed money, so they tried again with the Townshend Acts, taxing things like glass, lead, paint, and, most importantly, tea. The colonists pushed back again, arguing that these taxes were illegal. Their reasoning was simple but powerful. They had no elected representatives in the British Parliament. They had no voice in the laws being passed. This gave birth to one of the most famous slogans in history: no taxation without representation. It wasn't just about the money. It was about the fundamental right to have a say in their own governance. They felt they were being treated as second-class citizens, there to fund the empire without enjoying the full rights of Englishmen. The tension was escalating. Then, in 1773, Parliament passed the Tea Act. Now, this is where things get interesting. The Tea Act didn't actually impose a new tax. In fact, it was designed to make British tea cheaper. The British East India Company, a massive corporation, was on the verge of collapse, with warehouses full of unsold tea. The Tea Act gave them a monopoly on the American tea trade, allowing them to sell their tea directly to the colonies at a price so low it would undercut even smuggled Dutch tea, which was very popular at the time. So, cheaper tea sounds good, right? Not to the colonists. They saw it for what it was, a clever trick. The British government was trying to tempt them into buying the tea, and in doing so, implicitly accept Parliament's right to tax them. It was a Trojan horse. They weren't just buying tea, they were surrendering their principles. The colonists recognized that if they accepted this, it would set a dangerous precedent, opening the door for all kinds of future taxes without their consent. For them, it was never about the price of tea, it was about the principle of liberty, and they were not going to be bought off. Resistance flared up across the colonies. In cities like Philadelphia and New York, protesters successfully forced the tea ships to turn back to England. But in Boston, the royal governor, Thomas Hutchinson, was determined to enforce the law. He refused to let the ships leave the harbor until the taxes were paid. 3 tea ships, the Dartmouth, the Eleanor, and the Beaver, were docked at Griffin's Wharf, loaded with 342 chests of tea. A tense standoff began. The law stated that if the taxes weren't paid within 20 days, the cargo would be seized by customs officials, sold, and the tax would be paid anyway. The colonists were running out of time. The deadline was December 17th. On the cold, tense night of December 16, 1773, the people of Boston decided to take matters into their own hands. Thousands gathered at the Old South Meeting House, where leaders like Samuel Adams rallied the crowd. After a passionate meeting, a decision was made. This was the moment of truth. A group of men, members of the Sons of Liberty, disguised themselves as Mohawk Indians. This disguise wasn't just for hiding their identities. It was symbolic. By dressing as Native Americans, they were identifying themselves as Americans, distinct from the British. They were saying, "We are not British subjects in this moment. We are something new." Under the cover of darkness, they marched silently down to Griffin's Wharf. The crowd followed, watching in anticipation. The men boarded the 3 ships, their intentions clear. They were not there to loot or cause chaos. In fact, they were incredibly organized. They demanded the keys to the cargo holds from the ship's crew, who offered no resistance. They broke open the heavy wooden chests, 342 of them, and, one by one, hoisted them up to the deck and dumped the entire shipment of tea into the Boston harbor. They worked for 3 hours, and by the end, over 92,000 pounds of tea, worth nearly $1 million in today's money, were floating in the salty water. It was a powerful, silent, and dramatic act of defiance. This wasn't a riot. It was a political protest of epic proportions. The Boston Tea Party was a clear message to London: we will not be controlled. News of the Boston Tea Party spread like wildfire. Some colonists were shocked by the destruction of private property. Even George Washington disapproved of it at first. But for many, it was an electrifying moment, a bold stand against tyranny. In Britain, however, the reaction was one of pure outrage. King George III and Parliament were furious. They saw this not as a protest, but as a rebellion, an act of treason. They were determined to make an example of Boston and crush the colonial spirit once and for all. Their response was swift and harsh. In 1774, Parliament passed a series of laws that the colonists quickly labeled the Intolerable Acts. These were designed as punishment. The Boston Port Act closed the harbor to all trade, crippling the city's economy. The Massachusetts Government Act stripped the colony of its self-governance, placing it under direct British military control. The Administration of Justice Act allowed British officials accused of crimes to be tried in Britain, not in the colonies. And the Quartering Act forced colonists to house British soldiers in their own homes. Britain thought these punitive measures would isolate Boston and terrify the other colonies into submission. They could not have been more wrong. The Intolerable Acts had the exact opposite effect. Instead of dividing the colonies, it united them in a way nothing had before. The other colonies saw the plight of Boston and realized that if it could happen there, it could happen to them next. They rallied to Boston's aid, sending supplies and messages of support. Virginia's House of Burgesses called for a day of fasting and prayer in solidarity. The attack on one colony was seen as an attack on all. This new sense of unity led to a groundbreaking step. In September 1774, delegates from 12 of the 13 colonies, all except Georgia, gathered in Philadelphia for the First Continental Congress. This was a monumental event. For the first time, the colonies were acting together as a single, coordinated body. They drafted a declaration of rights and grievances and called for a complete boycott of all British goods. They weren't calling for independence just yet, but they made it clear that they would defend their rights, by force if necessary. The lines were drawn. The Intolerable Acts, meant to crush dissent, had instead created a unified American opposition. The Boston Tea Party was the spark that lit the fuse. What began as a protest over taxes had now spiraled into a full-blown crisis. It transformed the struggle from a debate about representation into a movement for independence. Less than a year after the First Continental Congress, in April 1775, the shot heard round the world was fired at Lexington and Concord, marking the beginning of the American Revolutionary War. The tea floating in Boston Harbor had turned into a tidal wave of revolution. The legacy of the Boston Tea Party is immense. It was the catalyst that directly led to the formation of the United States of America. It demonstrated that ordinary people, when united by a common cause, could stand up to the most powerful empire on earth. This radical act of defiance didn't just change America, it changed the world. It inspired countless other movements for freedom and independence across the globe, from the French Revolution to anti-colonial struggles in the 20th century. It's a powerful reminder that history is often shaped not by kings and generals alone, but by the bold actions of citizens who refused to accept injustice. It all started with a group of people who decided they'd had enough, and a harbor full of tea, a single act of protest that echoed through the centuries, forever changing the world as we know it. Thanks so much for watching. If you found this story as fascinating as I do, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into the events that shaped our world. Let me know in the comments what other historical moments you'd like to see covered. Until next time, stay curious,